I've been thinking, two of the most popular characters in the whole of Mortal Kombat are Kitana and Mileena, partly because of their relationship and rivalry with one another. And that rivalry is deliberate, since they were obviously conceived as a pair. Both of them debuted in Mortal Kombat 2. They're initially presented as sisters, then opposites and mirror images of one another and arguably of femininity as a whole, and they continue to be written in relation to one another today. But there is another pair of characters that are also women and also Edenians that tick these boxes despite them not having been conceived as a pair. Jade was introduced as a hidden opponent in MK2 and made her first fully playable appearance in Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, while Tanya first appeared in MK4, a game that doesn't even feature Jade in the story nor on the roster. And yet there are dozens of contrasting traits I can name between the two. Jade is forthright, Tanya is deceptive. Jade fights for her friend and people, Tanya fights only for herself. Jade's main weapon is a blunt general purpose one, while most of Tanya's weapons are meant to kill. Jade uses dark shadow, Tanya uses bright fire. I could go on. And I like that the writers later saw this same potential between the two and tried to make something of it in MK Deception and Armageddon, which are, sadly, the only two games where they both appear. It's such an unfortunate mismatch that when one of them is featured, the other one is benched. Perhaps the devs felt that going over a certain arbitrary number of Edenians or sexy female ninjas is overkill, which would make the entire dev team gay. One of the things I find both interesting and ironic about these two is that the good one uses sneaky dark shadow powers while the bad one uses bold bright fire. It's kind of the opposite of what you'd expect. Liu Kang is the ultimate good guy and he's a fire user, while Shadow makes you think of someone like Noob Saibot. Of course, there are plenty of counterexamples to this, but it still registers as a neat bit of subversion because Tanya's a good girl gone bad, while Jade is a bad girl gone good. Tanya is the daughter of an Edenian ambassador. She was supposed to be a bright, shining example of Edenian virtue, hence the fire association. Yet she ended up a stain on Edenia's name. On the other hand, Jade was trained by Shao Kahn to be an assassin and dispatch his enemies. Yet in the moment of truth, she renounced that role for the sake of Kitana and their realm.
Life is full of these little ironies.
Both women have their own perspective though. There might be grains of truth to Tanya's did what I had to survive mentality, despite her taking that to the extreme and using it to hide something darker. That said, her submitting herself, and by extension her realm, to various foreign rulers could be argued to have preserved Edenia, its people, and its culture to a degree, for Edenia was one of the few ones who survived being conquered multiple times, as well as being outright merged with Outworld, and came out the other way with its people and culture mostly intact, while other realms who were perhaps more confrontational or less valued, like Zatera, weren't so lucky. So there is some merit to Tanya's philosophy, but it's also something she uses to justify some of her most diabolical actions. Actions that betray fear, cruelty, and a shameless lust for power. Jade had the opposite journey. She served as Shao Kahn's enforcer for millennia, but when the chips were down, she didn't crumble or delude herself about what was the right thing to do. She refused to apprehend Kitana or allow her to be assassinated, since the death of the princess would spell the beginning of the end for Edenia. Mileena would be installed as a puppet governor, and the Edenian people would slowly but surely diminish and dissipate. So Jade made the hard, selfless choice at great personal risk. Since Edenia has been conquered so many times though, someone like Tanya would probably opine that saving the royal family is a mistake, since they seem incapable of protecting the realm, which, you know, Sindel and Kitana didn't really achieve much as Queen of Edenia and Khan of Outworld respectively, and Edenia fell to basically every single big baddie from Shao to Shinnok to Onaga. But it's also the kind of 70% true, 30% false Andrew Tate style logic that a slithery, weaselly person like Tanya would pull. By the way, the name Tanya, as serviceable as it sounds, always took me right out of the immersive experience. We got cool made up name, cool made up name, cool Asian gemstone and color name, and Tanya. Tanya is like Galadriel, Andariel, and Jane. Yeah, I know Mileena's technically in the same boat, but for some reason Tanya just sounds funnier to me. Maybe because I know Boone named the character after his sister. Is that just me? I always thought it wasn't just me. Maybe it's just me. And since I'm riffing on this woman, I have to confess something. I hated this character. As a kid playing Mortal Kombat 4 for the first time, I couldn't stand her. Everything about her seems designed to be as annoying as possible, from her face, her stance, the yellow welcome mat she's wearing, her repulsively oversized tits, her nagging voice, her moves, and her second fatality, which is halfway between a face fuck and decapitation the long way, literally screwing your face while unscrewing your head. Then they somehow made her voice even more annoying, emulating what I can only describe as a chain-smoking chipmunk. Isn't this woman supposed to be comely and seductive? No? Okay. Look, I get that she's getting her sternum punched through her spine, but she needs to shut the fuck up. Powers and abilities. You know, it's funny how Fire and Shadow consistently seem like natural enemies. It's not just Tanya and Jade, but Scorpion and Noob Saibot too, arguably some of the most proficient wielders of these elements, but I digress. As mentioned earlier, Jade and Tanya's elemental powers mirror the upbringing that they had and are at odds with their respective destinies. Tanya was supposed to be a bright flame of Edenian politics who instead turned to a dark path of betrayal and subterfuge, and Jade mastered quick, sneaky shadow techniques that contrast her benign soul and intentions. It's no coincidence that Tanya was paired up with Liu Kang in MK4. They're both fire users, and Tanya presented herself as an ally to the Shaolin monk only to attempt to betray him later on. Everything about Tanya is structured around the idea that appearances are deceiving, even her moveset. Her fireballs are her Edenian heritage, yet the rest of her moves are wily and deceptive, like her split and corkscrew kicks, which slap and slither beneath her opponent respectively, and that, especially in MKX, double as a mix-up tool, one move being an overhead and the other being a low attack. The MKX version of her fireballs, as well as her short-range port, also add to the slippery, slithery theme, as they make her one of the most annoying, hard-to-pin-down zoners in the game. Given how the teleport works, I'd log that as a fire skill as well, rather than a dimensional gateway. It's just Tanya infusing herself with fire to move really fast. The enhanced version actually damages opponents as she passes through them, so that reinforces this idea. Her purple pixie dust, on the other hand, is a far more interesting and peculiar technique. It could be some sort of magic spell that's the equivalent of dousing your opponent in kerosene, making the next fire attack hurt much worse. Or it could be illusion, which would be a fitting secondary element for her. It being purple, like most other illusion attacks, making the opponent feel like an attack hurts more than it otherwise would. The fire dash being enhanced by illusion, since many movement skills are illusion. There are plenty of arguments to make this case. Bright, unsubtle, forthright fire is her heritage, while illusion is her weapon of choice, despite it not being her natural aptitude. Just like how she was trained to be a diplomat, not a saboteur, her chosen compound is made up of water and air, neither of which has anything to do with the fire element she's naturally good at. Jade's powers, on the other hand, are fairly consistent. She only really uses shadow, most notably her blazing nitro kick. Who named this, a 5-year-old? Look, it's a shadow kick, visually and functionally no different than Johnny Cage's own shadow kick, Nightwolf's shoulder charge, or Shao Kahn's shoulder charge. Shadow is an element that deals with density. Matter can be manipulated to harden like rock or soften like water. The basic shadow kick is actually both of these, as the initial acceleration of the kick is generated by making the body less dense as you dash and propel yourself forward, but then making the body harder right before impact to make the attack a more credible threat and deal more damage. So it's a pretty tricky technique to learn, which highlights both Jade's countless years of experience as an Edenian and Johnny Cage's talent as a normal human, especially since, as a more seasoned fighter in MKX, he was able to take this to the next level and develop semi-autonomous after-images, shadow projections that help to overwhelm opponents. Not complete clones like Noob Saibot, but they got the job done. Jade doesn't use clones though. Instead of projecting and making matter more dense, she focused her efforts in the opposite direction, making herself less dense to the point of partial intangibility, which is a rare feat. The only other shadow user to achieve this technique is Noob, except Noob makes his opponents partly ethereal, while Jade makes herself ethereal. While not powerful enough to completely phase through an opponent or a large object, she completely nullifies projectiles while in this form.
Can't touch this.
This highlights Jade's own duality, as I always saw her as a character that could swing either way on the yin-yang spectrum. She can both charge at you heel first, forthrightly, or resort to trickery, and it's also reflected by her color of choice. We talk a lot about how Reptile is green because he's a combination of Scorpion and Sub-Zero, but the same thing applies to the lady nins. The fiery, ruthless Tanya and the proud but honorable Kitana are color opposites, while Jade is a mixture, which is reflected in her fighting style, and it should be reflected in her personality as well, as she should have both virtuous morality and devious tendencies that she keeps in check. And her demeanor definitely fits this bill, especially in MK9, where her voice, her mannerisms, her body language, her overall presentation resemble that of a playful, mischievous woman torn between her loyalty to her friend and loyalty to her ruler. And the more I think about it, the more this Powerpuff color stuff is consistent between the male and female ninjas. It's like the male version of yellow is vengeance and rage, while the female version is deception and betrayal, and both versions struggle with selfishness. Meanwhile, the male blue is cold, calculating, emotionless murder, while the female version is that, plus also the chilling, disapproving look of prideful royalty, the ultimate expression of the picture-perfect woman looking down on men. Yet both versions ultimately become a force for good, and that leaves Jade in an interesting position. Honestly, she's a character with a lot of potential that's been stuck as the token BFF since her inception. And it's not just her color, demeanor, and powers that reflect her duality, it's her weapons as well, of which Jade has two, non-lethal stick and lethal, wily, boomerang, tri-blade, chakram thingy. Her bojutsu is a great all-purpose sparring weapon and a good tool for a protector and bodyguard to have. The Razorang, however, seriously, who named these? Is both lethal and behaves in tricky, sneaky ways, returning and hitting enemies from behind after the initial attack. Kitana's attacks are all swift and meant to offer a quick death. Melina's piercing weapons mostly focus on stabbing and dealing as much pain as possible. Jade has a great defensive blunt weapon that can nonetheless cause a serious headache if need be, but also a lethal one for swift assassination and trick shots. And Tanya, well, Tanya changes her weapon faster than her nail polish, which is obviously just the devs exploring different things and failing to stumble onto anything that sticks, but it also kind of fits her duplicitous, slippery, non-committing personality. First she's a good girl, then she's a bad one, then she serves Shinnok, then Shao Kahn. Okay, you know what? It's actually Onaga. In that same fashion, she goes from Boomerang to Tom Fuzz to Naginata and Tom Fuzz to losing relevancy fast. It's worth mentioning that her first weapon, her Boomerang, shares similar characteristics and symbolism to Jade's own bladed version, which is fitting considering they both have a wily side to them. Most of her other weapons are stabbing and thrusting weapons, which is appropriate, and her Naginata is her most iconic one, giving her reach, thrusting potential, and some decent mix-ups with her pole perch fake-outs playing off of her deceptive nature. Redeemer and Destroyer of Edenia. The feminine is oriented inward by default. A woman has to consider her own safety and the safety of her womb/children. That's her biological impetus. Men are the ones who are more outwardly oriented, not women. This is not a bad thing, but can often translate into selfishness on the woman's part. And Tanya is the ultimate expression of that, as she prioritizes her own needs, ambitions, and safety time and time again. But, if written correctly, could also be nuanced enough to show just how morally gray the world can force you to be at times. It could leave the viewer wondering how much this is really the character's folly and how much was inevitable, or just make us ponder whether or not heinous actions are indeed sometimes justified, kinda like in the Dune series. And out of all these characters, Jade is the one who ends up embodying the selfless aspect of the feminine, one that's so rare it might as well be a unicorn. Because within this realm of the feminine, bravery, self-sacrifice, and true sisterhood are difficult virtues to achieve, and that makes Jade a truly special character. Both of them have a lot to offer. These are characters that most of the series has gone to great lengths to perfect, and that the last two games have gone to great lengths to ruin. We're talking 100% commitment here, from N1K Tanya being modeled after a silverback or something approximating Jay-Z's bottom lip, to turning Jade into Jadilla, to dressing her up like Red Riding Hood, or Brown Riding Hood rather. That's not racist, that's the color of the outfit. Oh look, there's actually a red one too. You do know Jade is a color, right? And it's not that one. To slapping them with the most inconsequential, out of left field romances possible, but I suppose I should be thankful that they chose to maim them one at a time. If they butchered both in the same game, I'd have to stab both my eyes at the same time. And lose.